Question 16. Which of these options best describes the internet? Is it a series of tubes, an encyclopedia, a collection of websites? Well, let's go through our options, shall we? The first one says a series of tubes. Now, I seem to recall someone describing the internet like that before, but it's not really very accurate. You could say that the information being carried across the internet has to travel through a series of telephone cables or a series of carriers, but that's not really a series of tubes. Is it then an encyclopedia? Of course, many people like to use the internet to gather information on different resources, right? So it's a little bit like an encyclopedia. But the internet as a whole isn't an encyclopedia. It can just contain an amount of encyclopedic knowledge. You might even be able to find an encyclopedia within the internet. But the internet itself is not, in fact, an encyclopedia. So C looks promising, a collection of websites. But in fact, this isn't quite right either. Remember that the internet, as well as being used to access websites, can also do things like send email, or send instant messages, or send video and audio communication. So it can't just be websites. It's got to be something more than that, although there are a lot of websites on the internet. D says a group of networked computers, and at first that seems a little underwhelming. But in fact, D is the correct answer. All the different computers on the internet, there are millions of them, will either be a client sending requests or a server receiving requests and sending responses. So every time you access a website, your computer is requesting data on a very distant computer that might be on the other side of the world. And that distant computer will have to send it back before you receive anything on your own computer. Every time you send an email, it's going from your computer through the internet to some central server that determines who it's sent by and where it goes. Then that central server will take the email and send it to its recipient. So in all these cases, we're not just sending something from computer to computer, we're sending something through a huge group of networked computers that are all communicating with each other. Question 17. What types of data can be used to communicate on the internet? Well, remember, what does the internet send? Analog or digital data? Well, digital, right? So anything that can be represented as digital data, ones and zeros, can be sent through the net. So can we only send numbers? No. If we take a wave, we can take samples and turn the analog data into digital data. It turns out that we can do the same thing with pictures. We can divide a picture into lots and lots of little slices called pixels and represent each pixel by a number. Once we have a number for each pixel, we can send the whole sequence of numbers as a binary number through the internet. Some ways that we can use to communicate over the internet might be through text. Of course, each letter can just be represented by a different number. By images, where we can represent each pixel as a different number, or we can use more advanced algorithms to decrease the size of the image file. We can use videos, which take up lots of data, but of course, if we use compression algorithms or decrease the sampling rate, we can make them a lot smaller. Or finally, we can use sound, whether it's just over a headset or with a video or audio recording. Question 18. What transformations does text contained on a website go through before it can be displayed on a screen? Now we have a few transformations here. Let's go through them. First of all, we convert the text data to ones and zeros, right? We reduce the text data to numbers and those numbers to base 2 numbers, which consists of just on and off pulses. Then we can encode that into a signal that's sent through a modem over telephone lines. When it arrives at the destination, then we take the telephone line signals, turn them back into ones and zeros, turn those back into text data, and have the computer on the other end receive and decode those signals. Once we have that, we can just send it back. The text will be sent back through the signal, through the modem and through the phone lines and back to the computer that originally sent the request. And once the computer has received the response, it can take the ones and zeros, turn that back into text data, take that text data, turn it into code that can be read by a web browser, and then the web browser can take that raw text data and produce pretty text data. And that's responsible for, of course, the layout and the color of anything that you might see in a website. Although it's worth pointing out that most web browsers have an option to allow you to view the source of any web page. And if you use that option, then you'll be able to see all of the raw data that the web browser receives. Question 19. A certain internet connection can transmit data at 30 kilobytes per second. If a headset encodes voice samples with 2 bytes per sample, what's the maximum sampling rate at which the headset can transmit? If we transmit too many samples per second, then we'll be trying to transmit more than the internet connection is capable of, and we'll end up getting glitches or stuttering or just a failure to transmit. Alright, so let's see if we can figure this one out. How many bytes is 30 kilobytes? Well, if we say that a kilobyte is 1,000 bytes, then we have 30,000 bytes per second. 30 kilobytes of data and 2 bytes per sample means we can send 15,000 samples per second. 30,000 bytes over 2 bytes per sample. And that will translate, of course, to just 15 kilohertz. Now this is about 3 times lower than the sampling quality of a CD. That means that the fidelity is not going to be extremely high. However, it's high enough that we'll be able to understand anything that is sent over the microphone. It just won't be extremely high quality sound. Question 20. Data from websites is usually sent from the server to the user in little packets. Each packet contains a certain amount of data and a position where it matches up in the packets. So it might be an identifier saying, this is which packet I am. Now the thing is, if we're sending both a payload of data and information about that data, sometimes called metadata, then we're actually sending more information than we need to. We're sending a payload plus an extra bit that's hanging on for no apparent reason. So why do we send this extra bit? Why do we send the packet's location in the finished sequence instead of just the finished sequence? Can you think of a reason? Well, the answer is, of course, that internet connections aren't perfect. Can you see what I mean? Data will sometimes become corrupted or lost when it's sent through telephone lines. There might be an error transmitting a message from one carrier to the next carrier, so that the next carrier never gets the signal and doesn't know what to pass on. In that case, the signal will never arrive. The other possibility is that the signal will arrive, but it will be all garbled and corrupted, and we won't know what it contains. So that means that if we sent all the data at once, we either wouldn't receive it, or we'd receive a mangled version of it, unless we were very lucky. If we send it in packets, then that means that if a packet gets lost or corrupted, then we can just ask again for that particular packet. There are enough packets being sent through that some of them will turn in unharmed, and each time you send in another request for packets, you'll get more of them coming in unharmed. Eventually, we'll be able to get all the packets uncorrupted and unlost, and we can just assemble them all and produce the final piece of data. And that, of course, is why we don't send a huge video file or a huge image file all at once. We send it in little pieces. Right, so that's the end of the questions, which means we are now at the end of both the lesson and the end of the module. Congratulations! So we've now finished going through all of the world communicates. We've learned about how different sorts of waves work and how they interact with each other. And most recently, we've learned about the difference between analog and digital data and how digital data can be sent through the internet. Good luck for your exams.